Hi everyone. So we are in week 5 of our Leaders Who Lead series. And this week we're going to look at elevating commercial awareness in your team. It's a topic that we hear from clients all of the time, but even more so at the moment when we're having so many challenges with the economy and people coming out the other end of COVID-19 and what that's going to look like for their business. That commercial awareness of your team is going to be even more critical. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to start us off today.
I mean, I think you're right. It's really important currently, but it's important all of the time. We often hear our clients talk to us about the challenges that they're having, and they're keeping those challenges to themselves. You know, often as a leader, as an owner in a business, the things that keep you awake at night are definitely not the kind of things that a lot of our employees sort of think about. And how do you get that transition so that your employees can think more commercially and be more commercially astute? So, and often that's a leader is thinking about profit and increasing revenue and looking at sort of cost management and efficiencies. And sometimes in a senior management team, they might be tasked to manage that in their departments. But how do you get everybody in the business to understand the impact of their choices and the impact of the wider business, not just their own role? And, you know, often we hear with some of our clients, it's they don't want to share everything. So, but in the same sense, they do want their employees to be more focused on the bigger picture. So, you know, and that's not just always linked to profits. It can be loss of opportunities. It could be the impact of winning a job, but then the job not becoming profitable because they spend too much time on the job. It's actually sometimes the things that are relatively simple to explain. But really it's that transition that sometimes they're just not on the same page. But in order to get everybody within the business on the same page, you do need to take some steps as a leader. And that's what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's really that thinking, isn't it? It's that they just have a different mindset. Often the team members think about different things to the leaders. So it's how do you drive them to think more about some of those things? And the first piece really is that it's that piece around, first of all, dispelling some of the myths that often come with leadership. I think, you know, there's lots of people we hear all the time of saying, we're just lining the owner's pockets, or you hear from leaders saying like they think that we make millions and millions of cash versus actually revenue. And you've got to address some of that stuff, because sometimes the challenge is that if you don't educate your team around that, then they may well continue to believe that, and sometimes that can directly impact how commercial they are. So we always talk about educating your team around that. Do some financial training with your team. You know, educate them about things like the difference between revenue and profit, where to those of us who run businesses and are on leadership teams, it should be obvious, but it's not. The difference between profit and cash, the difference between, you make profit in a year, but how much of that is reinvested versus how much of that goes out to directors, because those are things that often a lot of team members, you know, there's definitely team members within the business that will be aware of that, but a lot of team members just don't get that. So doing some sort of education around it is that first piece. There's a little bit of a caveat with that, because we've seen this go wrong, is don't think about how relatable the information that you're giving. Like if you've got a finance director in your business that struggles to articulate things without using financial jargon, that's a challenge. So make sure that it's really obvious what you're teaching. But that financial education piece is so important, and that's what ties into the piece Sarah will pick up on around then taking that education and tying that into incentivizing the team around some of those sort of key commercial deliverables.
And before you break out into a cold sweat thinking about we haven't got enough money to start introducing new incentives into the business, what we're not talking about is increasing the cost of the business. What we're looking at is sometimes you can reevaluate how you align those compensations, and actually, so it doesn't have to cost you any more money, but you incentivize them in a way where it's linked to the business's growth and the business making, for example, increasing the profit within a job, and that being incentivized so that the realigns. So sometimes it can be really worth thinking about how can you realign those compensation packages. And obviously we know not everybody is incentivized by or really motivated by just financial gain, but and obviously we've talked about some of that stuff in the previous sort of leadership sessions we've delivered. But what it does do, if you imagine if someone has some skin in the game, as it were, within a project, they are more likely to think about the commercial impact of their decisions. And I think that's the piece. It's around actually the more transparent you can be, and obviously we're not saying share everything, but being transparent about impact of decisions or making choices, and actually putting it out there and getting people's input into decisions that are linked to the commercial output of the business actually then incentivizes people to think more along those lines. So it's really about, it's you as a leader have to think about what's the trade-off if you don't. So if you leave your team and your employees in the dark, what's the trade-off for that? And actually, if you are more transparent within the commercial elements of the business, then people start to think about the wider business and the impact of not just their role, but they're incentivized to actually think about their department and their team, and then potentially how they might then cross work with another department and another team, and really think about how that incentivization can also bring team work together and incentivize the cultures and the values within the business too. So I think that that's super important.
Yeah. And we've seen it work. We've seen businesses transition from just sort of traditional compensation structures to actually doing something that's profit driven within a project or within a particular role. And it is categorically, they've seen growth in revenue and profit because of that. Because like Sarah said, it's that skin in the game piece. People are just likely to be more invested if it impacts them personally.
Yeah.
And really the last little piece to sort of tie this together is kind of leading on from that transparency piece. It's creating things in the business that drive the right behaviors. So we've talked previously about sort of these meeting structures that we work with clients on, but one of them is a scorecard. If you can put scorecards together, whether that's across the whole business, whether that's in particular departments, around key deliverables that you want to see, then put people's names against them and then report on those on a weekly or monthly basis. It drives visibility of the outcome, because often people don't get to the outcomes because they don't really know what it looks like. So what's the number? As an example, have you got a billing target or a sales target for a particular division each month? What is that number? And then ultimately, who's responsible for achieving that? And it's that peer accountability piece. So there's two: define the outcome so everyone knows what it is, and then create some accountability around that. And really the second layer of that is it gives you that visibility across a period of time of potentially areas in the business that might need some improvement. So if you've got numbers that are consistently lower, often when businesses don't have that visibility on something like a scorecard, 6 months go by and then they suddenly realize that something's wrong commercially. Whereas if you're looking at that weekly and the whole team is looking at that weekly, it's more likely that you're going to catch that. And then putting together what we call sort of rapid improvement groups. So groups of team members that then take the problem and figure it out and put something in place. And it's actually members of your team doing that. So everything doesn't come to you at a leadership level to solve. Again, buying them in, making sure that you define that improvement. So if we make that improvement, it's going to take this from X to X, and this is the benefit to you individually. Actually checking those numbers and then driving some accountability around that's really important. So we have, as we have in all of these, put together a little workbook which actually goes through this. We've actually given a model for creating a scorecard if that's something you want to look at to do in your business, and a model for how to set up rapid improvement groups. So those are all outlined in that. So if that's something that you're interested in, we'll drop the link below and you can go ahead and do that. But for now, have a great week, and we will be back next week with the final piece, just a little checklist to pull this whole series together. Thanks.
Thanks.